self-evident that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. I'm going to take this first hour and I'm going to talk about one topic from three different aspects, and that is build the wall or keep it shut. And by it, I'm referring to the partial shutdown of the federal government. It is temporary, and it can go on indefinitely. And I'd say that unless we're going to build the wall, which is what the electorate voted for in electing Donald Trump, then why am I going to allow the government to remain open? So let's take a look at the current lay of the land. We did have an election in 2016. We were told by Barack Obama when he was elected that elections have consequences. Well, there were four things at least that Donald Trump ran on very blatantly, very openly. One was getting rid of Obamacare. 2 was tax reform. 3, and these are not in any particular order, was nominating Supreme Court justices, making a clear distinction between whether you wanted him or Hillary Clinton to nominate justices. And 4 was a border wall with Mexico to deal with immigration or illegal immigration. Well, let's remember something. Obamacare is gone. No, it's still there. No, you don't get it. The only part of Obamacare that mattered was the individual mandate, where you were trying to force people to pay for something that they might not otherwise buy. The individual mandate is dead. Absolutely gone. Which is why, for the third time since it's been passed, a federal judge has ruled all of the Obamacare law unconstitutional. And it's not going to get saved this time by the Supreme Court. And even if it does, there's no mandate. Tax reform went in. The government, the economy is doing very well, just as Trump said it would. And on the Supreme Court, 2 justices in, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg is not long for this plane. So the Alamo for the Democrats has to be stopping the wall. Now, CBS News on Saturday came out and had this to say, kind of giving an idea of what's going on with the current lay of the land with respect to the shutdown.
This is day 22 of the partial government shutdown, now the longest in U.S. history. 380,000 federal employees are on temporary layoffs. 420,000 are working without pay. TSA workers learned today they're receiving a one-time $500 holiday bonus to help them until their next paycheck. Furloughed government workers lined up for groceries today at a pop-up food bank in Alexandria, Virginia. President Trump and congressional Democrats remain locked in a dispute over border wall funding. The president unleashed a tweet storm today on the shutdown and an explosive report that the FBI investigated him as a possible Russian agent. Errol Barnett is at the White House.
In a series of tweets this morning, President Trump defended himself against the New York Times report, which claimed the FBI investigated whether the president was a Russian asset or potential threat against American security after he fired FBI Director James Comey in May of 2017. CBS News has not independently confirmed that report.
I was going to fire Comey. My decision.
But the New York Times says it was President Trump's own public statements connecting the Comey firing to Russia which raised concern among agents.
When I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story.
The president insisted today his, quote, firing of James Comey was a great day for America.
Absolutely ludicrous.
In an interview airing tomorrow on Face the Nation, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said he rejects the New York Times allegation.
The idea that's contained in the New York Times story that President Trump was a threat to American national security is silly on its face and not worthy of a response.
From the White House, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders called the Times claim absurd and said Comey is a disgraced partisan hack. The former FBI director sent this tweet today, quoting President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, quote, "Judge me by the enemies I have made." Now, all of this leads to Special Counsel Robert Mueller, whose team has not made any public comment on the extent of its investigation. But Mueller's team has secured the indictment of 3 associates of President Trump, and the grand jury used to secure those indictments just received a 6-month extension to keep working. Rena?
Errol Barnett at the White House. Errol, thank you.
What I like about that is, one, there was a little clever editing where you tried to make it seem like Secretary of State Pompeo was calling his boss's words absolute nonsense. But the other thing was they CBS cited a report and said they hadn't confirmed it, but it formed a significant part of their story, an unconfirmed report. Isn't that fascinating? Kind of is. And they moved immediately away from getting into any detail about the shutdown to talk about workers who were not working. Of course, I don't remember them doing that when Barack Obama was in office and the workforce participation rate for the entire country, not just Washington, D.C., and the federal government was falling like a rock to its lowest level in three decades. I just don't recall that. Also, this is just not really credible to start talking about this investigation. The investigation has nothing to do with a border wall, but they're talking about it. Now, ABC, on the same day, they unleashed their report, not talking about the issues anymore. They went straight for the jugular and went for the heartstrings, talking about the sad situation for federal workers.
Next to the other major story out of Washington, the government shutdown, now officially the longest in American history with no end in sight. Hundreds of thousands of Americans waking up this weekend after missing their Friday paychecks, the kitchen table concerns clearly mounting. And from the White House, President Trump firing off tweets insisting he has a strategy. ABC's Lana Zach is at the Capitol.
Tonight, the longest government shutdown in history, showing no sign of ending anytime soon. President Trump tweeting today, "I do have a plan on the shutdown, but no word yet on what that plan is, besides the Democrats giving in on his request for a wall." For his part, the president says he will never back down.
I swore to protect our country.
Releasing this campaign-style video on Twitter and asking Democrats today to come back for more negotiations, even though it was the president who walked out of the last meeting.
A temper tantrum by the president. I'm a mother of 5, grandmother of 9. I know a temper tantrum when I see one.
But while the politicians are at an impasse, everyday Americans are caught in the crosshairs.
It's a matter of life and death for me because I have to pay out of pocket for my medical insurance.
Hundreds of thousands of federal workers receiving empty paychecks. Oliver Garcia, a father of 4, is selling his camper and car to make ends meet.
If we can get rid of the camper and the car, we could make up some cash to pay for the mortgage.
Kelly Chafin, furloughed from the Department of the Interior, says she's out of money.
With $200, I can't pay my student loan, my federal student loan. The government gave me this money to go to college, and I can't pay it. Nor can I pay my rent, nor can I pay my car insurance or my car payment.
And across the country, the impacts of the shutdown are snowballing. And at Miami International Airport, a concourse closed to ensure that there are enough TSA agents to staff the other security checkpoints.
And Tom, there are no meetings scheduled right now between the president and Democrats, and many say that all good faith has been completely eroded. The president may still decide to make that emergency declaration, which could end the impasse, at least over the border wall. Tom?
Lana, Zach for us tonight. Lana, thank you. And George, we'll have much more on the shutdown stalemate tomorrow and this week, including a new poll about the stalemate and the proposed border wall.
What do you bet that their poll is going to say that Donald Trump is responsible and that Donald Trump's in trouble? They're not going to pull up the poll that says at least 63% of Americans surveyed say that the shutdown doesn't affect them at all. Well, what about these 800,000 people? Okay, what about them? The Democrats could have worked that out at any time. They could have. They could have said, you know what? We're not ready to talk about the wall, but we do want to make sure these people get paid. Can you at least agree with us on that? Put Trump on the spot about the people. They don't want to do that because it's not about the people. It's about the election that he won, and keeping those people unemployed is a way to keep pressure on Trump. They're using them. They know they're unemployed. They know they're missing paychecks. They're not interested in relieving their misery. Now, the thing came up with about a national emergency. For those who don't fully understand how a national emergency declaration from the president works, Washington Post did a reasonable job. Reasonable because we know it's Washington Post and they can't stand Trump and nothing they say will be done to put him in a good light. But they did kind of make the effort to explain how a national emergency declaration might work.
National emergency because of the security of our country, absolutely. No, we can do it. I haven't done it. I may do it. I may do it.
As the shutdown stalemate over border wall funds continues, President Trump is threatening to declare a national emergency to get his way.
I may declare a national emergency dependent on what's going to happen over the next few days.
In doing so, Trump would bypass Congress's constitutional authority to appropriate funds and instead use military funds to construct the wall. The proposal has brought up questions over just how far the president can extend the executive branch's emergency powers and just what qualifies as a national emergency.
Other than this president, we really haven't seen the use of emergency powers or declaration of an emergency around an issue of immigration. The emergency tends to be pretty clear for all to see, right? One is a natural disaster, a terrorist attack, a major one, could be a national emergency of sorts. These are emergencies that are clearly defined. They're also often limited in duration. They rarely involve sort of widespread appropriation of funds that have not been authorized for that purpose.
Trump's supporters and aides are trying to publicly build the case for a border emergency.
A genuine humanitarian and security crisis at our southern border, a bona fide emergency, an undeniable crisis.
But unlike disasters like Hurricane Katrina and 9/11, many critics contend that the situation at the border doesn't rise to the level of a national emergency.
Where's the emergency? You have to establish that in order to do this.
This president doesn't have the power to declare an emergency and build a multi-billion-dollar wall on the border.
Others say that even if Trump does enact a national emergency, he faces a legal precedent from President Truman's administration in the 1950s. Back then, the Supreme Court ruled against Truman's attempt to nationalize the steel industry during the Korean War.
What Jackson said in that case, Supreme Court Justice Jackson, is that the president's authority is at its lowest if Congress has prohibited a certain act. In this case, I think it's relevant in the sense that, well, if Congress refuses to give Trump the money for the border wall, that isn't arguably a prohibition, right? It's a refusal.
An emergency declaration would be ripe for legal challenges on that front, as well as overusing military funds on domestic soil, seizing private property along the border, and the environmental impacts of a border wall. But with Democrats in control of the House and campaigning for 2020 already kicked off, Trump appears to be dug in over building the wall this time. And a national emergency could be his way out of the shutdown, without appearing to give in to his critics.
This is potentially a last-ditch attempt to do it, to get this border wall built, that he's really been locked into since he started his campaign, when he started chanting, "Build the wall."
He's locked into that just like he was locked into Obamacare. He got that done. He was locked into that the same way he's locked into tax reform. He got that done. He was locked into the wall the same way he was locked in on the Supreme Court nominations. He's done 2 of those. This isn't anything new. I love how Nancy says, I'm a mother of 5 and a grandmother of 9, and I know a tantrum when I see one. No, others who were there said there was no tantrum. He walked in, he asked one question. They said they're not going to talk about the wall. He turned around and he walked out. It's not a tantrum. That's just like, there's no sense in wasting my time. And it would have been a waste of everyone's time. You remember the altercation is not the right word, the conversation in the Oval Office between Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Donald Trump, where they openly disagreed in front of cameras, and Nancy Pelosi went out of her way to keep asking about getting the cameras out, that we need to have this discussion behind closed doors. The reason being so she could come out and lie like she did then and say that Donald Trump threw a temper tantrum. Everyone saw what happened during that meeting. Donald Trump was Donald Trump. And he was trying to say, look, we're going to do this, and if you guys don't want to do it, well, okay, well, fine, I'll take my position, and then we'll just go forward with that. Wonderful. But now with this national emergency, you notice that national emergency is sometimes the same things they do with respect to flooding from hurricanes and things of that nature. This is nothing new. This is not some invention in the Trump era. It happens almost annually. But you want to make it look like something different. Going on with the national emergency declaration, on the 11th, Fox News brought something out about that I thought was interesting.
Sources say President Trump rejected an attempt by Senate Republicans at a grand bargain. So South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, one of the driving forces behind it, says the president should declare a national emergency and build his wall.
I always said it would be the last resort. We're there. There's no pathway forward that I can see, so the president believes he has his power. Seems to me the only way left is for him to exercise that authority. I don't see any action in the Congress.
The pessimism is because the top Democrats in Congress have not shown any interest in negotiating with the president on border security money. But the House Majority Leader says the president should not go around Congress.
This is a challenge. There's no doubt about that. It's a challenge. We ought to be working together to make the borders secure. But it's not a national emergency anymore. There was a national emergency during the campaign when the president said we were being invaded by this large group of people.
The House is once again debating an individual spending bill for the Department of Interior, which is part of this partial shutdown. Some Democrats argue the border is not that bad.
I live on the border, and I will tell you that if you look at the latest FBI statistics, McAllen, which is part of my area, had 4.8 murders per 100,000. Washington, D.C., here, it's 16.7. So it's almost four times more dangerous here in Washington, D.C. when you look at those crime statistics.
After President Trump's tour of the border, a Texas senator expressed his frustration with this fight.
We got elected to govern. We didn't get elected to preside over a shutdown. To me, that's a failure of government. And but unfortunately, Washington, D.C. is so polarized now. People are so fixated on who's going to win and who's going to lose this argument that they forget the people that get hurt.
Pressure should be building as some 800,000 federal workers are not receiving their paychecks today.
Let me tell you how disingenuous that was. The Texas lawmaker who talked about the low murder rate in McAllen, Texas, left out the fact that McAllen, Texas has a wall between it and Mexico. That's how disingenuous this has become. So they're outright lying, and I remember the Texas senator, I think it was John Cornyn, who said, we were elected to govern. Well, then why didn't you? You were there for 2 years when you had a majority in both chambers of Congress, and why didn't you get the wall funding done then? You didn't govern. You did not execute the will of the people. I don't have a lot of sympathy for you now. There was an election. You didn't do what the election called for. And now when the president says, I'm going to get this done, and I can't depend upon you anymore because you failed, now you're indignant? I don't think so. Elections have consequences. And when those consequences, or when the will of the people is not enacted, then you're seeing one of the consequences right now. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3. We're going to move into the second part of this topic of build the wall or keep it short. And we're going to talk about the 2 decades of broken promises that we've had with respect to the wall. A website called WorldStir, as in WORLDSTIR.com, put together a very interesting piece talking about, and they call it a brief history of the Mexico border wall. Goes back way back. I mean, it goes way back. It goes back into the 1800s. I'm not going to pick it up there. But I will pick it up at this point. In 1993, it reads, President Bill Clinton mandates construction on a 13-mile border wall along a line in the sand between San Diego and Tijuana. It is projected to cost $39 million and reduce border apprehensions from 100,000 per day to 5,000 per day for those 13 miles. Well, they only bid 13 miles, and you put a wall there, they just, as it says, immigrants find other paths. It's, pretty simple. If I'm going to put a wall there, I'm going to go someplace where there isn't a wall, and he only built 13 miles. But it reduced border apprehensions 95% in the place where it was put. Amazing. In 1996, the same president, Bill Clinton, he signed the Illegal Immigration Reform and Responsibility Act, which increased fines for illegal entry and approved funding for more patrols and fence construction. And immigrants shift away from the traditional crossings into privately held land. In other words, he put more funding in for patrols and fence construction, and wherever they built, they said, we're not going there either. So when everybody says that the walls don't work, it's like, you know what? Why is it that they avoid the walls? Just asking. They shifted away from the traditional crossings and started going into privately held land. So now you have the people who live along the southern border watching this cascade, this parade of humanity coming through their property and wondering, well, where the heck is the federal government? Because this is their responsibility to stop this. These people are trespassing on my private land. So the landowners had to come out of their pocket because, the federal government wasn't going to do it, and they had to put up their own fencing. Oh my, another type of wall or barrier. The government barriers worked at the place where they built them, but these people didn't have barriers on their property, and therefore they just went there, and now they had to. Are you following this yet? That was in 1993 and 1996. Pretty much the first term of Bill Clinton. Now in 2006, now we've moved on to the Bush administration. President George W. Bush signs the Secure Fences Act, which promises 700 miles of fencing on the border, plus a virtual wall across the entire 2,000 miles of the border. Needless to say, very little, if any, of that was built. Because in 2007, the Department of Homeland Security argues it is impossible to construct the same type of fencing across the border's diverse terrain, and they asked for an amendment allowing a variety of barriers, including fencing, physical barriers, roads, lighting, cameras, with another $12 billion in funding. Are you catching on to this? Starting with the Clinton presidency and going through the Bush 43 presidency, and that'll take you back. Go back to 93, we're talking about 25 years, talking about a quarter century. We've been dealing with walls, trying to actually build walls in relatively recent history, and the only thing we know is that the only way to stop folks is to put up some type of barrier. If you put up a barrier, well, they're not keeping off private land. Look, they're just stringing barbed wire. In most cases, that's all they can afford. These aren't rich people on the border. So, 2010, the New York Times writes that over the previous 4 years, we're going back to 2006, and remember, that's when Bush signed the Secure Fences Act, 51 unauthorized tunnels running under the border walls have been found in Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales, Sonora, mainly for drug trafficking, not immigration. And that's the argument here today. Well, they'll just dig a tunnel under it. Well, if you build a wall that doesn't have a foundation that penetrates the ground, yeah, you can do that. But you can also build a wall whose foundations go all the way to the bedrock. Let's see how you tunnel with that. You can make it harder. 2011. Gee, this happened under our good friend Barack Obama. Homeland Security completes 649 miles of barriers, not wall, including 350 miles of pedestrian fencing and 299 miles of vehicle barriers that cost $1.7 million per mile. But $1 billion spent on a pilot program for virtual surveillance in Arizona yields only 53 miles of coverage. With the backing of the DHS, the Obama administration cuts funding for the rest of the hyper-expensive virtual wall. Let me know if you're catching on to this. Here is my point. We were told, we were promised over the last 25 years that the federal government would do something about illegal immigration. I can go back before that. I can go back before 1993 to the great duping of Ronald Reagan, who signed that Immigration Act in 1986 that took us from a 3 million person problem and put us on a path to the 12 million plus problem that we have now. Why did that occur? Because he listened to Democrats. Well, Bill Clinton said he was going to do stuff. Bill Clinton is a Democrat. You name the last time a Democrat protected the sovereignty of the United States, and it might be the first time. That's not what they do. If I were going to be fair, I would probably say the last Democrat president in my lifetime to protect the sovereignty of the United States with respect to its border may have been Lyndon Johnson. May have been, but there wasn't a physical barrier involved. Donald Trump has now said, we need a wall. The American electorate agreed and made him president. The problem is, there are too many progressives in government. Far too many. They don't think with regard to the welfare of the American electorate, the American people, the American citizenry, or their children. Because if they did, the first time an illegal immigrant came across here after having been deported several times and killed people, something would have been done. But the Republicans do nothing, and the Democrats actually excuse. They ask the families who've lost loved ones, you have to understand the greater problem. That was Liwatha's story, talking to people who had lost a family member. That was her story, Elizabeth Warren being Liwatha, or Pocahontas, whatever you want to call her. That's the Democrat position. Not that the American people deserve protection, but that the American people have to be more understanding when their loved ones are killed. Now, I'm not exactly sure how you get there, And to be honest with you, I'm not even sure I want to get there. But that's where you have to be a Democrat. That's their position. We don't have a problem. Doesn't matter how many bodies pile up on the border, or because the border is porous, we don't have a problem. At all. Everything's good here. There's no emergency. You heard that. Some say, well, what's the emergency? People are dying in America. In a 2015 report of the Western State Sheriff's Association, and this back in 2015, estimated that 25 Americans were killed daily by illegal aliens. It's not my number. Well, how do you know that's true? How do you know anything that anyone tells you is true? That's the number that they reported. It's not my number. Well, don't you think that's a little bit high? Let me help you out. I think one's a little bit high. I think the young lady who was shot in San Francisco, and San Francisco went out of its way not to convict this man of killing her. They put him in jail, but you gotta understand what happened. How does that family supposed to understand what happened? Some guy picked up a gun and shot their daughter and killed her. And he's not paying a price for that. He's getting free room and board, and they're going to let him out. Or the young lady in Iowa who knew her illegal alien attacker, and he killed her. And the position of the Democrats is always the same. Well, what about the children who were detained at the border? He didn't say anything about the children being detained at the border when Obama was detaining them. They weren't an issue there, and he treated them with much less compassion than has the Trump administration. Well, they're being separated. There's a whole lot of evidence that up to between 40 and 80% of the children who are coming accompanied by adults are not related to these adults. They're being used. And the Democrats, let me help you out. If I know this, then the Democrat Party knows this. And you have to ask, why is it that you keep talking about all these other methods that you do not specify that we know to be effective in controlling the border? Well, how come you haven't enacted any of them in the past 25 years? The only one that seems to work but can't be totally effective because you won't deploy it across the entire border is a physical barrier. If you make it harder to come, then fewer will come. You're not going to get a caravan of women and children trying to deal with a border wall. It's not going to happen. But they want to put this out there as though we simply lack understanding and compassion because we don't want our children killed. We simply lack compassion and understanding because we don't want Mexican gangs and Mexican drugs flooding into the country and taking over and doing harm to our citizens, to our children, to our neighbors. We don't want illegal immigrants coming over and receiving tax money and assistance that could go to Americans who are hurting, could go to veterans who are not being as well taken care of as arguably they should be. You're giving that money instead to someone who entered the country illegally. You are choosing illegal immigrants and their children over American children and American veterans, and that is the Democrat position. There's really no way to sugarcoat that. That's what they believe. That's what they want. That's who they are. 2 decades of this. And if you go back to 86, we're talking more than 3 decades of the government knowing that there is a problem, even going so far as appropriating money to build a physical barrier, and then finding some type of bogus reason not to follow through. And now the electorate has found someone who is saying to the American electorate, oh, you want a wall. Got it. Let's fight for the wall. Let's not fight for funding for things we don't know that work or things that we know do not work. Let's fight for the wall. Let's put up a wall and then build from there. Two decades plus of broken promises by the federal government, and they are doing their best to get it to continue. And like I said, you go back to the Reagan administration, you'll find 3. They broke promises from 1986, from 1996, from 2006, and now the Democrats are trying to break a promise that was made to them by the sitting president during the 2016 election. 4 separate decades of this drama, and we're still here. And you think the issue is 800,000 workers out of a workforce of more than 160 million that aren't getting paychecks because the Democrat Party doesn't want to protect the American people. That's not the issue. Never has been. And I don't know if it ever will be. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin', we'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of this first hour, final segment of this 3-phase topic, build the wall or shut it down. And this is the future fight. Now, and I want to start this by saying, one of the things that you understand about this fight is how disingenuous the opponents or the adversaries of the president are with this. The president is saying we need to protect the American people. We're not trying to punish anybody as much as we are trying to protect the people who live here. Because the people who are coming in, they're bringing crime, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing mayhem. And our response to that is to do nothing for the folks who belong here, for the children who belong here, for the people who pay for the government services, one of which is to protect them. And on top of all that, when you start talking about Trump, and this is a Fox News story, I know how people feel about Fox News, I really don't care. They still ran a story based on one of the things that Donald Trump has done, and let's be very clear about this. The United States electorate has been asking since the 2008 general election for jobs to be the priority of the federal government. They didn't get that under Barack Obama. He sucked at jobs. They didn't get that under Bush before. Well, they did get that under Bush. And then the bottom fell out. You had the Great Recession. Because before the Great Recession, you had 47 straight months of positive job growth that pulled in more than 7.7 million jobs. And then everything fell apart. Oh, and there was a tax cut in there too, for those who don't recall. So Donald Trump has done the same thing. We're going to cut taxes. And it's amazing because people hate Trump so much. You won't talk about what matters to the American people. You want to talk about the smaller things that are only affecting a relative few. Well, 800,000 workers. Guys, more than 4.8 million people now have jobs who did not have jobs in the first 2 years of the Trump presidency. Are you hearing that? He's averaging more than 200,000 jobs produced per month. And for those who forget, wages increased as well. Fox News put out a story, actually it was on Sunday the 13th of January. They brought in apparently a new person, because she didn't seem to handle the TV time very well, to discuss what the media is deciding, or the rest of the media is deciding to overlook.
Getting buried in the media headlines about the partial government shutdown is the fact that U.S. workers are actually winning. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the rate of labor force participation for prime age adults ages 25 to 54 rose in the fourth quarter of 2018, more than in any other quarter since 1994. Joining us now to discuss the booming economy is Romina Bacha, the director of the Grover M. Herman Center for the Federal Budget. Romina, good morning. It looks like some good news is getting overlooked.
Good morning. Indeed, very good news are getting overlooked. And this partial government shutdown is really small. You're looking at $325 billion out of a more than $4 trillion budget, so maybe 7-8% of federal funding. So the economy is continuing to roar thanks to the president's deregulatory agenda, which is continuing to push, and also these sweeping tax cuts, which were very significant. The largest tax cut, the biggest tax reform in 30 years. And businesses are loving it. Small business confidence is way up, and that's why we're seeing so much hiring and so much growth in the economy.
Yeah, you mentioned hiring, Romina. Let's just look here at the December jobs report. 312,000 jobs added, 3.2% wage growth, 3.9% unemployment growth. How does that get lost in the media?
Well, unfortunately, bad news seems to sell better, but these are really good news all around. This was an amazing jobs report, and I think that we're going to continue to see strength in this economy, especially if the president continues his push to further deregulate, because that is what allows businesses to grow and hire workers. But for long-run growth, we also need to think about how can we boost innovation and further productivity enhancements. And some of the dark clouds on the horizon are the rising deficit and debt. But don't despair. Those are all problems we can fix. The good news right now is that minorities in particular are benefiting greatly from this economy, which is really awesome. Women, Hispanics, black men and women both are returning to the labor force in droves. And labor force participation is also starting to inch up, which is really good news.
Romina, let me get you to put in context, if you will, as we hear so much about the workers, because of the shutdown, are going without a paycheck, that we feel for them. And no one wants anyone to suffer like that. But when you put that in comparison to the growth that we saw in that December jobs report in the economy, give us some sense of really how we should process this.
Yeah. If you're looking at how many federal workers are affected, it's about 800,000 of them. About half of those are eligible for unemployment benefits. And in the Washington, D.C. region, where I'm located, about 8,000 federal workers have filed for those benefits. Now, when those federal employees receive their back pay, which they have historically received, and which both the president and Republicans and Democrats in Congress seem to want to provide for them, they've already passed bills to do so, they will have to return those unemployment benefits. So I feel bad for workers that are working paycheck to paycheck, that are suffering during this government shutdown. But I think it's important to look at also what aspects of the economy are affected by the shutdown.
Absolutely.
And maybe
they had to shut Chica down because she was getting ready to violate their TV time limit. But did you hear that? Minorities, black men, black women returning to the workforce in droves. Well, we've been saying and have been saying for some time that black unemployment is at record low levels. Hispanics coming back. Workforce participation for the prime work demographic. People are coming back at the highest rate they've seen in almost a quarter century. Well, now it is. We're in 2019. This is as high as it's been since 1994. Are you picking up on any of this yet? Why is what's going on with 800,000 people, the focus of everything, when that can be turned around in a heartbeat. All Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi have to do is walk in and say either here's the money for the border wall, or we're not ready to do the border wall, but can we pay the people? That's it, just a straight bill, a straight agreement to pay the people who are on the federal payroll and are currently not getting paid. Now, personally, I don't know. I know how I feel about those who are coming to work and not getting paid. I don't know how I feel about those who are on basically deferred pay vacation. I'm not exactly sure about that. But they could come to the table with that this evening, and they would probably find a listening ear in the White House. So why don't they do that? I actually pretty much have it figured out. It's part of the overall thing. And of course, we're going to talk about what Donald Trump did. MSNBC came back with a report on Friday where Trump rejects the showdown deal Republicans negotiated amongst themselves. In other words, the Republicans were trying to cave again. Well, we need to open the government. You heard John Cornyn. We were elected to govern. We need to govern. I said, excuse me. How is it that you're governing, but you're not taking care of a primary responsibility of government, which is border protection? Exactly what type of governance are you doing? So as difficult as it may be, I have to look past the fact that it was an MSNBC report, which is pretty much propaganda, and look into what it implies about things, quite frankly, of concern. First, I know the Democrats want the federal government to be fully open. I know they want that desperately. The federal government is their primary weapon against the will and the welfare of the American people. Without it, they can't keep American wombs as killing fields. Without it, they can't push an homosexual agenda. Without it, they cannot attack religious liberty, stifle the economy, or, wait for it, invalidate the last general election. And Democrats have really abandoned the America doesn't want a wall talking point, because that hasn't caught on. It really hasn't. And now they're emphasizing how terrible it is that the federal government is partially shuttered. But it's not terrible. 1/4 of the federal government is gone and the country hasn't missed a beat. Americans are now getting an opportunity with the longest shutdown on record, partial shutdown on record, to see how life goes with less federal government. What the Democrats don't want, and quite a few Republicans don't want it either, is for the American people with each passing day to see that a temporary shutdown, maybe this needs to be the new normal. A government with less size, with less scope, and less of an impact on American life and culture, because if you keep this thing shut down, you're going to have to shuffle around some deck chairs on this Titanic and maybe put some things off on the state that are currently with the feds, and you probably have to send the money back to the states as well. Oh my. And now GOP senators got together, and on Friday they were going to scuttle the border wall. So they're going to undermine the president and undermine themselves. Because it's not as though the American people think highly of the Republican Party. They just know that the Democrats suck. It's really just that simple. But they would get together and undermine the president and themselves 2 Novembers from now and reinforce the notion that the only difference between a Democrat and a Republican is what letter they put after the guy's name. What mascot he identifies with. It's really terrible. And the question is, why would they do that? Well, one is because their power over and influence upon the American people is decreased by smaller government, and only slightly less so than Democrats, because Republicans have a Senate majority temporarily. It's because senators only face the voters every 6 years. They have the longest tenure of any elected official in D.C. So they get out of touch real quick, and they get all into each other. You always hear senators talking about my good friend from across the aisle. And it's because they value their donkey party good friends more in the Senate more than their Republican good constituents back home. Reopening the government would please, comfort, and unify them with their buddies from across the aisle. And in their mind, no president could possibly oppose that type of bipartisan harmony in the Senate. The problem is that bipartisan harmony, it flies in the face of the electorate's choice in the last general election. Someone who campaigned on having a border wall. So again, this is not about swamp versus Trump. It's the federal government versus you. If the federal government reopens without the border wall for which you voted in 2016 and which they have promised for more than 2 decades, in 1996 with the Illegal Immigration Reform and Responsibility Act, in 2006 with the Secure Fences Act, if they reopen without that, then when it comes to national sovereignty and the American identity, elections have no consequence and you have no voice. Further, once they will have muted you without consequence because you haven't done anything about the widespread election fraud in the midterm in 2018. So once they see that they can do that again in 2020 and you don't do anything about it, let me help you out. If you don't rise up and fix what happened in 2018 in 2020, or before 2020 arrives, the election fraud that they pulled off in 2018 is going to look like a disputed traffic ticket compared to what they're willing to pull out to knock down Donald Trump and silence the American voice for at least a generation. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to my good friend, Ron Edwards, and after that, we'll be back with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin'.
When you go to work and refuse to do your job, you get fired. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, congressional members are voted into office to represent our interests, which includes safety. Due to ongoing illegal border crossings, 90% of the heroin coming into America at the southern border, human trafficking, etc., our republic is under tremendous strain. Sovereign Americans are regularly murdered, raped, cut up, and run over with automobiles driven by illegal border crossers who literally have no business being in our republic. President Trump has tried until he tried out to get Democrats to work with him on a deal to properly secure our borders. But the problem is congressional Democrats do not want a deal. Thus, so far, not even a compromise can be reached that would include physical barriers in vast areas that remain wide open for disrespectful illegals to simply stroll into their favorite sanctuary city and wreak havoc. Thus, President Trump must hold the line and not cave into those in Congress who should now be fired. I'm Ron Edwards. Join me Fridays at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on AmericaMatters.us and 12 a.m. Sundays on Talk America Radio Network.
Ron Edwards, the new voice of America.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin'.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin'.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it's made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin'.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3. Well, we are at that point where the pressure on Planned Parenthood and abortion advocates throughout the country is mounting. I dare say that we are getting to where we have a tipping point almost with regard to abortion in these United States. And Donald Trump is at the forefront of this, as he is on many issues going on in the country. Donald Trump made it very clear during his campaign that he was so pro-life, or at least he had become so pro-life, that he believed women who killed their babies should face some sort of a consequence for so doing. He later walked that back, bless his heart. But I think it kind of makes it clear where he's coming from. And for those who weren't sure, the president made it crystal clear in January of last year when he appeared at the March for Life in Washington, D.C.
Today I'm honored and really proud to be the first president to stand with you here at the White House to address the 45th March for Life. That's very, very special. 45th March for Life. And this is a truly remarkable group. Today, tens of thousands of families, students, and patriots, and really just great citizens gather here in our nation's capital. You come from many backgrounds, many places, but you all come for one beautiful cause: to build a society where life is celebrated, protected, and cherished. The March for Life is a movement born out of love. You love your families, you love your neighbors, you love our nation, and you love every child, born and unborn, because you believe that every life is sacred, that every child is a precious gift from God. Because of you, tens of thousands of Americans have been born and reached their full God-given potential. Because of you. You're living witnesses of this year's March for Life theme, and that theme is love saves lives. Roe versus Wade has resulted in some of the most permissive abortion laws anywhere in the world. For example, in the United States, it's one of only 7 countries to allow elective late-term abortions, along with China, North Korea, and others. Right now, in a number of states, the laws allow a baby to be born from his or her mother's womb in the 9th month. It is wrong. It has to change.
It is wrong. It has to change. This is coming from a sitting president of the United States. I don't remember hearing quite those words quite that clearly. Ronald Reagan was reportedly anti-abortion, but he wouldn't show up at one of these functions. It's just the way it is. Donald Trump did. And Donald Trump put some very clear statements out there against abortion. So what we can say is the federal branch of the government is in the no, we're not down with abortion column. Does it start stop there, because, okay, the executive branch is out of the way. What about the judiciary? Because they're the ones who are responsible for getting us into this pickle in the first place. Well, Mr. Trump is doing some things in the area of the federal judiciary as well.
President Trump is already making a huge impact on the nation's courts, just 1 year into his term. With help from Republicans in the Senate, the president won confirmation for 23 federal judges, including a Supreme Court justice, 12 circuit court judges, and 10 district court judges. That 1 year total is far more than the number President Obama appointed at this point in his presidency. Jan Crawford is outside the Supreme Court. Jan, good morning.
Well, good morning, John. I mean, a Supreme Court nomination, that can be a president's most lasting legacy. And although President Trump has had a contentious relationship at times with the federal judiciary, he's already made a lasting impact. He's put one justice on the Supreme Court, nearly 24 judges on the lower courts, and that is just in year one. When President Trump nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court,
congratulations,
he delivered on a key campaign promise to replace the late Justice Antonin Scalia with a solid conservative.
You got to go for Trump. Supreme Court justices.
In 2016, 56% of Republican voters said the Supreme Court was the most important factor in their support for Donald Trump. But the White House is also making its mark on the lower courts, where the president is looking to fill 145 vacancies nationwide.
What the president's doing with the courts is truly transformative.
Leonard Leo is an outside advisor to the president on judges and helps lead the Conservative Federalist Society.
These are people who believe in self-government, that most of the big issues in our country need to be decided by the people and their elected representatives.
There have been missteps at the district court level.
Have you ever tried a jury trial? I have not. Civil? No.
Two of the president's nominees were forced to withdraw over questions about their qualifications. But on the appeals courts, the new judges are highly credentialed conservative powerhouses, what you'd expect from a traditional Republican president. Democrats say it's not qualifications, but their philosophy that could lead to a rollback of civil rights.
An alarming trend of more and more extreme judicial candidates.
We have seen President Trump nominate people far outside of the judicial mainstream.
The goal is not just to get a few ultra-conservative judges on our federal courts. It is to capture the entire judicial branch.
Leo says the judicial battles show elections have consequences.
The president made it very clear the kinds of people he was going to nominate, and that's what he's delivering.
Now, with Republicans in control of the Senate, filling those 145 vacancies clearly is within reach. But if Democrats take back the Senate, that could complicate things, especially if another justice retires while President Trump is still in office. Gail?
It's always interesting. Thank you very much, Jan.
And another justice did retire, Justice Anthony Kennedy, and was replaced by Brett Kavanaugh. As you recall, that was an all-out war on the part of the Democrats trying to shame that man and attack that man and smear that man into taking his name out of consideration, but he simply would not do it. He took the same path that Clarence Thomas did and just said, you're wrong about me and I'm not going to let you get away with it, and now he sits on the Supreme Court. And did you hear the statements from the Democrat senators? I think there was Pocahontas or Liwathi, Elizabeth Sanders. I also think it was Dick Durbin and one other who I couldn't quite recall. And they are laying it out very clearly. This isn't about trying to balance the thing. This is about trying to get a sea change in the federal judiciary to take over the judicial branch of government. Now, the reason they know that and can say that with such confidence is, guess what? That's exactly what the left did leading up to the 1973 decision regarding Roe v. Wade. They relentlessly packed the courts, and even more so afterward. They relentlessly put up people into the court system who were liberal. And they unabashedly and shamefully, to be honest with you, opposed anyone who was not liberal. You remember what happened to Judge Robert Bork. Do you recall what happened 3 years later with Clarence Thomas, even though Clarence Thomas made it through? This is what they do, guys. They don't have any shame. And they know exactly what Trump is doing. Trump is moving the courts to the right. He's taking away he is changing the mainstream of judicial thought, because after years of being attacked by leftist ideology and peppered with leftist appointees, they moved it to the left. Trump says, that's okay, we'll go the other way. And that makes them very uncomfortable. So what you're seeing is, on the federal level, you're seeing the executive branch, as long as Donald Trump is there, not being a friend of abortion. And if he has his way with all these appointees who will long outlast him in office, the federal judiciary is not going to be a great friend of abortion either. If that occurs, and a case gets through, and Roe v. Wade is overturned, then the left has a problem. But let's talk about what that problem is, because simply overturning Roe v. Wade does not make abortion illegal in these United States. What it does is say, you know what, the federal government, we don't have a dog in that fight anymore. It's a state issue. And that frightens the left immensely. Why? Well, NPR, at the beginning of the year, gave a summary of sorts of where they thought the battles were going to be on abortion.
When it comes to the issue of abortion rights, the U.S. Supreme Court gets a good deal of attention, but states have a lot of power to restrict and regulate abortion, and now with a newly reconfigured Supreme Court, activists say the stakes are even higher as state lawmakers reconvene this month. NPR's Sarah McCammon has a preview of how the battle over reproductive rights is shaping up in state capitals around the country.
Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh is known for his conservative record. With his confirmation, many abortion rights opponents see new opportunities to restrict the procedure at the state level. Jamison Gordon is with Ohio Right to Life.
The pro-life movement has been talking about more pro-life friendly court for years, and we see Kavanaugh really tilting that balance.
Activists in Ohio just pushed through a law banning a common second trimester procedure called dilation and extraction. Gordon says her group is feeling emboldened and working to pass more restrictions in the new year.
It's been encouraging for us, knowing that if our bill was sued on and it got picked up to go to the court, that we would have a more favorable court. So I do think that we've seen the tide turn.
Abortion rights advocates are also expecting a wave of bills to be introduced in state houses across the country. Elizabeth Smith is chief counsel for state policy at the Center for Reproductive Rights.
We think this will be a watershed moment in terms of the number that are filed and then potentially the number that will actually be enacted in various states.
Smith says advocates are working to protect abortion rights, repeal existing restrictions, and fight new efforts to limit access to the procedure.
I think the specter of the Supreme Court will be behind both the proactive bills in terms of shoring up the right and access at the state level. And on the other side, I think states that are hostile to reproductive rights are going to be jockeying to be the state that sends a law to the Supreme Court.
Abortion rights opponents are also watching the Supreme Court, hoping to overturn Roe v. Wade, the 1973 decision that legalized abortion nationwide. Sue Liebel is state director for the anti-abortion rights group Susan B. Anthony List.
Everybody wants, states want their bill to be the one to go to the Supreme Court. They want to be the one.
Possible test cases for Roe are already working their way through the courts, including an Iowa law banning abortion after a fetal heartbeat is detected, and one in Mississippi prohibiting the procedure after 15 weeks gestation. Liebel says anti-abortion activists want to pass similar bills in as many states as possible.
And so I think they're hopeful, they're energized, and raring to go.
If Roe were weakened or overturned, more power for regulating abortion would fall to the states. Elizabeth Smith, with the Center for Reproductive Rights, says lawmakers in several states, including Massachusetts and Virginia, are sponsoring bills to guarantee the right to abortion in state law.
State advocates in Texas have also pre-filed a Whole Women's Health Act. It's unlikely that bill will pass, but again, I think more and more state advocates are bringing up this bill either as a messaging vehicle or to actually get it enacted.
Abortion opponents say they'll fight those efforts and work to push forward more restrictions on abortion. With the newly configured Supreme Court, those fights are likely to intensify as many lawmakers head back to their state capitals in the coming weeks. Sarah McCammon, NPR News.
The battle will be at the state level. Now, that's not to say that even that there won't be some action in Congress or in the legislative branch of the federal government. We do have 3 Republicans, 2 of them in the House and 1 of them in the Senate, and all 3 are women who are taking aim at federal funding of abortions. Now, one thing that's interesting, one thing that is very interesting, one of the first things that the Democrats did when they came into office was, well, they tried to end the shutdown. But the other thing they did was try to extend federal funding of abortion. Well, they may be able to do that, they may not be, because obviously they now have control of the House, they do not have control of the Senate, and they don't have control of the White House. So likely on abortion at the federal level, except in the courts, there will be gridlock. But know this, the nation is no longer as keen on killing babies because women think it convenient as the nation once was. There will be some consequences. And there will likely be, in the not too distant future, some states that are marked with the scarlet letter A for abortion, and others that remove it. And that's a nightmare for the left, because now they have to fight that war on 50 state fronts instead of one federal. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin', we'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. This next story is really hard to explain in some ways. Portland, Oregon is in the ring of fire from a seismology standpoint. That whole Pacific Rim on both sides of that ocean where earthquakes are common and strong. Now, you might need a little bit of backdrop for this story before you can get into it. Portland is very much concerned about a big earthquake that they believe is coming in the next 50 years. And as a matter of fact, there was an earthquake in Chile back in September of 2015 that had government repercussions, at least getting government to think about the repercussions, all the way up in Portland, Oregon.
Thousands of people are returning to their homes today after an 8.3 magnitude earthquake hit Chile last night. At least 10 people are dead. More than 1 million others were forced to evacuate. The violent shaking caught on security camera began around 8 o'clock last night. Dozens of smaller aftershocks rattled the country through the night after the initial 8.3 quake. Tsunami waves caused flooding along the Chilean coast. Meanwhile, a tsunami advisory remains in effect for Southern California. Take a look at the waves this morning near San Diego. The Coast Guard says they are seeing increased swells up to about a foot, and they're also seeing choppy conditions. Police are asking swimmers and surfers to stay out of the ocean. There was also a tsunami advisory for Hawaii, but that's just been lifted. Experts say the fact that the death toll is not higher in Chile is a remarkable testament to how prepared they are for major earthquakes. We wanted to know how Portland and the rest of Oregon would fare in an earthquake the same size. Brent Weisberg is going beyond the headline.
Experts say if an 8.3 magnitude or larger earthquake hit the Portland metro, we'd expect to see a lot more damage than what we saw in South America.
Quake danger in Chile is very similar to what we have off the coast of Oregon.
The city of Portland today keeping close tabs on what unfolds in Chile. We asked them and the Bureau of Emergency Management how we compare to Chile in terms of earthquake readiness.
In Chile, it's important to remember in 1960, they had the largest earthquake in history, in recorded history occurred. And based on that and other quakes, their building codes are some of the best in the world.
The city has updated its building codes.
You design your buildings for what the known hazards are. And so a building today is built to a higher standard.
And encourages homeowners and private businesses to start earthquake retrofitting.
Now our building codes have started to catch up with other parts of the world, but we're not quite exactly where Chile or California or Japan happens to be.
In the coming days, weeks, and months, city officials, along with local and national geologists, will debrief, hoping to learn from the latest earthquake so that Oregon is better prepared. Reporting in downtown Portland, I'm Brent Weisberg. Coin 6 News.
So as far back as 2015, because of a major earthquake in Chile, Portland started looking at its building codes. Why? Because it is expected within the next half century that an earthquake of that size could hit off the coast of Oregon. And they're not sure they're ready. Well, as a result, they have gone out, bless their hearts, and put themselves in a position where you could say that they are preparing. However, it's not going over very well. Here's what happened back on the 4th of January of this year, after Portland had issued some earthquake guidelines regarding older buildings in the city.
A city ordinance is putting the future of some of Portland's most iconic music venues at risk, according to a group called Music Portland.
Yeah, that ordinance requires some older buildings to put a sign out by the front entrance stating that the building may not be safe during an earthquake. But this group says this would cause many local music venues to move or shut down entirely. Our Fox 12's Marja Martinez joins us live from the White Eagle with more on a demonstration that's planned for tomorrow. Hey, Marja.
Hey, Bonnie Pete, Music Portland is behind that demonstration, and they say its members aren't opposed to, aren't making non-retrofitted buildings like this one that's been around since 1905 safer in the event of an earthquake. They only oppose the forced placarding of these buildings and a contract officials want property owners to sign. The owners made it mandatory for owners of unreinforced masonry buildings or URMs to place placards on the properties informing patrons and tenants they're not earthquake safe. According to Mayra McLaughlin, executive director of Music Portland, at least 30 URMs in our city are well-known concert venues, including White Eagle, Crystal Ballroom, Dante's, and Kelly's Olympian. McLaughlin says along with the placards, property owners are being forced to sign a contract agreeing to costly seismic upgrades, adding an encumbrance to the title.
Say you have a building that's worth $800,000 and you've got $1 million encumbrance on that title, it means that people will not loan you money. So it is impossible to get the financing that you need to do the upgrades to make the building safer.
She calls the process counterintuitive and adds that a high encumbrance makes a property title distressed. In other words, a bank can recall the title on demand, she says. According to John DeLorenzo, the lawyer representing property owners who are suing the city over the ordinance, if they choose not to sign the contract, they will be subject to steep fines and other penalties. DeLorenzo says commercial and residential landlords have until March to put the placards up. He is working to file a preliminary injunction in federal court to temporarily stop the city from enforcing its ordinance until this case is closed. Tomorrow, Music Portland will be organizing a demonstration in front of City Hall in protest. Their members will be joined by other organizations, including the NAACP. Reporting live in North Portland, Marja Martinez, Fox 4 Oregon.
So you hear that. Now, let's just say that the city of Portland was a little bit awkward and heavy-handed with their ordinance, but their heart, quote-unquote, was in the right place. We know a big earthquake is coming. And the truth of the matter is there are a lot of buildings in Portland that are north of 90 years old and were built according to standards that couldn't take the shaking that happened in Chile in 2015. So what did they do? They basically said, you know what, you got to put placards up to warn people that this building is not safe during an earthquake. And oh, by the way, you're going to need to do something if you want these buildings to stay up and not have us condemn them as unsafe. You're going to have to retrofit these things so that they can stand the forces of an earthquake. And those were a bunch of music venues saying, wow, you're going to mess up our history and you know, you're going to put an encumbrance, and the way you're doing this, we're not going to be able to do this, that, and the... Okay, and you heard at the end the NAACP got involved. That's where it gets comical. According to 13 WSET, an ABC affiliate in that city, a new city policy requiring public signs on brick buildings warning that they might collapse in an earthquake is part of a long history of white supremacy aimed at forcing black people to move out of their neighborhoods, the NAACP of Portland, Oregon says. The group decried the policy affecting some 1,600 unreinforced masonry buildings that are on average 90 years old, many in areas with a predominantly black population. The policy exacerbates a long history of systemic and structural betrayals of trust and policies of displacement, demolition, and dispossession predicated on classism, racism, and white supremacy. Are you serious? This is what they said. It's asinine, but it's what they said. They went on. It speaks to our houses of worship and everything about the black presence in the northeast area, said the Reverend. There's always a Reverend involved here. The Reverend E.D. Mondane, pastor at Celebration Tabernacle Church in North Portland and president of the Portland NAACP chapter. This is ridiculous. City officials say the ordinance approved in October of 2018, is part of an effort ultimately aimed at upgrading old buildings to withstand an earthquake. I just played the other clip for you. Those seismic upgrades wouldn't be required for at least 20 years. And such upgrades could cost brick building owners millions. Experts say Portland is at risk because there's close to a 50% chance of a giant earthquake along the Cascadia subduction zone off the Oregon coast in the next 50 years. But the NAACP is complaining. See, you know what? Negrosity is nothing if not comical. For those, again, if you're not aware, Oregon is on America's west coast, the Ring of Fire. And it's quake prone. It's not just California that has the problem. And anyone who's ever seen what an unreinforced brick building looks like after the ground moves, anybody who's seen that is looking at the Portland NAACP with a serious side eye. What the heck is wrong with you? And they're telling you have 20 years before you have to do a thing. Now, I understand that some of these buildings, it is going to be less expensive to tear them down, to bulldoze them and rebuild, than it would be to retrofit them. Retrofitting is expensive. It's a tough process. And a lot of times it's just easy to rebuild. So, what you're trying to tell me is, and you heard the woman coming up here saying that it was going to be a problem, the encumbrance that they could put, so that's a big deal. And the NAACP's complaint is that the policy will make it tougher for owners of brick buildings to get loans and will discourage investment. It means buildings will have to be sold, and that developers will demolish and redevelop, increasing the cost to live there and forcing current residents out. Really? So what are you trying to tell me? That if you go for a loan with an unreinforced masonry building, that people aren't going to find out what it is during the loan approval process? And they say, you want me to sit there and give you money for an unreinforced masonry building in an earthquake zone? where they're predicting an 8.3 or better in the next 50 years. You think that's going to work? So the NAACP would apparently have blacks in those properties just sit there indefinitely and have their remains carted out with the next major earthquake's debris, rather than see the shaky properties improved or rebuilt. I keep telling y'all, negrosity is real. Now, of course, there are also unreinforced brick buildings in Portland's white neighborhoods. But I couldn't find any reports that the National Association for the Advancement of White People, Portland, Oregon chapter, was taking up a lament about the city's policy decision. Now, the music venues were the old ones, and nor did the NAACP seem to advocate for whites whose homes or businesses were unreinforced brick buildings. I guess they believe that every white person living in a brick house in Portland's got money. So the bottom line is this. Portland is located in one of the more active earthquake zones on the planet, with a coin flip's chance of a giant earthquake in the next 50 years. 8.3 or better. If you've never been in a earthquake, let me help you out. The earthquake that hit California, known as the Northridge quake back in 94, happened just before my oldest daughter was born. That was a 7. And the seismic scale works that, if you go from one number to the next number, that's an order of magnitude. That's a power of 10. So if you get 7 on the Richter scale, an 8 is 10 times stronger than that. And the Northridge quake collapsed a major freeway in the city of Los Angeles. So that's what Portland is staring at over the next 50 years, and they put out a policy intended to warn citizens of that risk and encourage them to prepare for a likely earthquake. And they issued it to everybody in Portland. But the NAACP is complaining as though it only went out to black folks. When all you see is skin color, then your entire perspective is corrupt. And you'd rather see your people buried in an earthquake than relocate and live just so you can complain about the white man. Like I tell y'all, negrosity is real, and it is nothing if not comical. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. The Democrat Sideshow for 2020 is now picking up steam. What do I mean by that? You just have to understand how many folks are prospective candidates for the Democrat nomination for president. You have Joe Biden, you have Michael Bloomberg, Richard Blumenthal, Cory Booker, Sherrod Brown, Steve Bullock, Peter Buttigieg, Julian Castro, Mark Cuban, Andrew Cuomo, John Delaney, Jeff Flake, that would be comical. Tulsi Gabbard, Eric Garcetti, who's the mayor of Los Angeles, Kirsten Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, John Hickenlooper, Eric Holder. I'd love that. I would love that. Jay Inslee, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. The Rock might run for president. Tim Kaine, who lost with Hillary in 2016. John Kasich, I would pay. He's a Republican, but he's a rhino. Please let him run. Joseph Kennedy III, Amy Klobuchar, Mitch Landrieu, I believe he's the mayor of New Orleans, I think, or I don't know if he might be the governor of Louisiana. Terry McAuliffe, Jeff Merkley, Seth Moulton, Richard Ojeda, Martin O'Malley, Beto O'Rourke, please let him run. Deval Patrick, the soy boy-looking black guy from Massachusetts. Tim Ryan, Sheryl Sandberg, Bernie Sanders, bring it, buddy. Bring it, provided he doesn't drop dead before Election Day. He's old as dirt. Howard Schultz, Tom Steyer, he said he's not running. Eric Swalwell. Then, of course, Mark Warner, Elizabeth Warner, and here's one that might surprise you. Mark Zuckerberg has made noise that he might want to run for president. Gee. That's just fascinating to me. Well, we know Pocahontas is running. Elizabeth Warren is running. We also know that Tulsi Gabbard, who is a congressional representative from Hawaii's 2nd District, who would only be 39. She's a nice-looking woman, too. She'd only be 39 on Inauguration Day. She's announced that she's going to be running. I don't know if she has a platform, but she says she's going to be running. John Delaney, who is the former representative from Maryland's 6th District, don't know who the heck that is, he's running. Who else is running so far? Julian Castro, former HUD secretary under Obama, he's running. And he's checked all the boxes. He's visited Iowa. He's in the polls. He's got an exploratory committee, and he's got a recent or an upcoming book. Former mayor of San Antonio. Really? Okay. This is going to be a very crowded Democrat field. Not going to be that crowded Republican field. It really won't be. I know people are thinking now that, we can go after Trump. Trump has a resume of accomplishments that I don't know what you guys are going to do. All you guys who've run against, particularly those who are already in politics, what have you done? I know how to get people to come together. No, I didn't ask you about that. What have you done? Donald Trump, while driving people apart, got rid of Obamacare, put tax reform on the books, has 2 Supreme Court nominees and counting, justices and counting. He's still trying to build a wall. I think he probably will succeed at getting a southern border wall built. If he can, not to mention he dealt with North Korea, which hasn't been done by any American president ever. What the heck are you guys going to bring to the table except I know how to unite people? Is that it? I don't know. I really don't know. Nevertheless, we're in that season. Strange as it may seem. And NBC, back in December, I think toward the end of December, ran a very short piece talking about Democrat prospects as far as who might run and who's ready to go in 2020.
'Tis the season for Democrats to decide.
Over the holiday, I will make that decision with my family.
During the holidays, I'm going to sit down and take a lot of stock.
Ringing in the 2020 race.
After the first of the year, we'll make a family decision.
The new year will usher in what is likely to be a gigantic field of Democratic challengers, competing for staff, resources, and voters' attention.
I'm going to reflect on whether this is something that I should do.
But all that thinking turns into action as early as January, some forming exploratory committees, formal announcements likely within a few months. The nomination is up for grabs from the most recognizable and experienced, like Joe Biden.
It's all about Donald. It's not about anything else.
Or Bernie Sanders wondering if he can capture lightning again.
Based on my past, based on my ideas, that in fact I am the candidate that can defeat Trump.
Or will Democrats make a generational shift? A USA Today Suffolk University poll finds 59% of Democrats and independents surveyed say they would be excited about someone entirely new. At least 6 senators could run for the first time.
And you have to decide that you would be a good president, that you could bring the country together, that you would be able to beat Donald Trump.
A November Senate defeat has not dampened buzz around Beto O'Rourke.
Not to rule anything out and just to be open.
While former Obama Cabinet Secretary Julian Castro has a date picked.
On January 12th, I'm going to make an announcement about my plans.
Of course, it's early and the path unpredictable, but the process is getting underway, with many of these potential candidates trying to position themselves in what will be a costly and competitive quest for the nomination. Democrats also have to decide among 3 cities where they will hold their nominating convention, and it will go fast. Iowa Democrats will be meeting to caucus in just about 400 days.
So there you have it. There's a very big field. There's a whole lot of Democrats who want to run. And let's not rule out Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton wants to be president more than a fat kid loves cake. I'm here to tell you, she has it in her mind that she is supposed to be in the White House right now. I'm sorry. She's just it's in her blood. She can't get it out. Her husband, who basically, ran roughshod like a rutting pig through D.C. He was president 2 times, and she bailed him out and covered for him and went on bimbo patrol and everything else. And it's her turn, and it was her turn, and Barack Obama popped up. So she's been beat out by a serial sexual predator and an Islamist bathhouse queen. So she's like, I'm due. If I can just get one more shot, I'm due. There's nobody else. Y'all can't come up with any more crazy characters, can you? Well, I don't know. You don't know what the heck is in that field right now. But you notice what they did say. They are really interested in seeing someone totally new. Really? Well, I don't know if he qualifies. But Julian Castro said he was going to make it an announcement on the 12th of January. And he did.
I am a candidate for President of the United States of America. I'm running for president because it's time for new leadership, because it's time for new energy, and it's time for a new commitment to make sure that the opportunities that I've had are available to every American. In the years to come, we must go forward as one nation, working toward one destiny, and that destiny is to be the smartest, the healthiest, the fairest, and the most prosperous nation on earth. As president, my first executive order will recommit the United States to the Paris Climate Accord. We're going to say no to subsidizing big oil and say yes to passing a Green New Deal. We will invest in housing that's affordable to the middle class and to the poor. And I know that we can turn things around. In the Obama administration, we made ending homelessness a priority, starting with veteran homelessness. And by the time we were done, we'd cut veteran homelessness almost in half. In the years to come, we can do that and more. I'll make pre-K for the USA happen. Universal pre-kindergarten for all children whose parents want it, so that all of our nation's students can get a strong start. And you know what? We're not going to stop there. We'll work to make the first 2 years of college, a certification program, or an apprenticeship accessible and affordable, so millions more young people and people who are returning to school later in life can get the skills that they need to get a good job without incurring a mountain of debt. I'm asking you to join me. You give me your support, and I give you my word. I will spend every day working hard to make sure that you can get a good job, that you can find a decent place to live, that you can have good health care when you get sick, and that your children and grandchildren can reach their dreams, no matter who you are or where you come from. We have always been at our best, but we're united by something bigger. And in this journey, in the days to come, together we will show that hope can be bigger than fear, that light can be bigger than darkness, and that truth can be bigger than lies. And as long as we work for it, tomorrow will always be better than today. So let's go work. Vámonos!
Well, at least it was better than Howard, what's-his-name's thing when he just went yeehaw at the end of one of his campaign speeches. So Vámonos is definitely better than that. But I don't know if he qualifies as someone new that the Democrat base can get excited about. But even if he is a new person, these aren't new ideas. Pre-K in the USA, universal, I've heard that before. I haven't heard one person who is a normal non-leftist American complain about not being involved in the Paris Climate Accords. It's not a new idea. Now, he stopped short of where Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez were with respect to the first 2 years of college or training. We're going to make that free. No, he said we're going to make it reasonably priced. We're going to make it affordable. Variation on that theme, but it's not a new theme. Here's the problem that the Democrats have. They have plenty of people. The Democrats have plenty of people. They don't have any ideas. Everything they're putting out there has been systematically rejected. Well, pre-K hasn't been. Where's the money coming from? It's already been rejected as too expensive. Well, health care when you get sick. We just got rid of Obamacare. No, Obamacare's still there. No. Obamacare was about an individual mandate. That is gone. It's gone. So there is no, let me help you. Julian Castro, he's talking about hope and change and lies and, okay, wow. Fear and, really? So these wonderful, nice sounding high themes, and he's nowhere near the teleprompter reader that Obama was. You know, people say, oh, he's a great speaker. No, he's a very good teleprompter reader, because all you do is turn that thing off, and Barack Obama became a stuttering idiot. At least Julian Castro doesn't seem like a stuttering idiot, but he doesn't have any great rhetorical skills either. So, if that's it. Now, Tulsi Gabbard also, that nice-looking girl from Hawaii, she announced as well. I have no idea what her platform is, except for picking a fight with Senator Hirono of Hawaii, that misandrist piece of work who told everybody, all men in America, that they should be quiet. I don't know what her claim to fame is. I mean, she was in the National Guard, and she did do a couple of tours in the Middle East. Thank you for your service. So what's that got to do with making you president? You're very young. The only thing you ever done is something in Hawaii and in Congress for Hawaii. What in the world makes you think that you... Guys, understand something. They're just throwing stuff up against the wall and hoping something sticks, or somebody in this case. I want to see Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and Hillary Clinton. I want to see them in it. And, you know, I really want them to do so well that them, along with Liwatha, since she's already declared, and this Julian Castro guy, and Tulsi Gabbard, I hope every one of them comes in with a similar number of delegates and super delegates, although I know that's not going to be the case, so that we can have a real floor fight at the DNC convention, and people have to decide at the convention who is going to be the nominee for the party. You know why? Because the Democrats will embarrass themselves, because they still have no ideas. The Democrats have not had an idea that anyone considers novel since 2008, and Obamacare is just what Hillary tried to do through her husband in '93. And that has been tried and failed. The Democrats have no economic policy. They have no military policy. They have no foreign policy. All they have is personality. And if that were enough to get the program over, all they had to do was nominate somebody who was more of a human being than Hillary Rodham Clinton. But they didn't. If I'm going to be a betting man, and I'm not a betting man, but if I were a betting man, I would say Donald Trump is likely to be president as long as he can stay upright until January of 2025. I don't see anyone out there in the Democrat Party who has a snowball's chance of laying their resume next to Donald Trump's as president and being able to say with any conviction and with any proof, any substance, that they'll do a better job. And that's our show. God bless you. May God keep you. Remember, your country is actually in an ideological civil war. And it's not between Democrats and Republicans, it's between Americans and progressives. A lot of progressives in the Democrat Party, but there's more than 2 or 3 among those considered Republicans as well. You need to identify them as what they are, domestic adversaries, and advocate for those things that keep you at liberty, like building a wall and keeping the government shut until they do. Until next week, may God bless.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.